Right, we're going to talk about the care gap or the therapeutic vacuum, and that's the time between point of injury happening and the first point of meaningful care. And while you can translate this across all aspects of emergent or acute health, it's particularly at the forefront when you think about marauding terrorist attacks or when a mass casualty happens, in one of our cities or in the county, okay? And too often we discuss the mass casualty incident either as an all or a nothing conversation. And thanks to some multiple inquiries, and I'll touch on some really key inquiries and key outcomes from big events around the world, things are changing, and things are changing for the right reason, the right reason being evidence. So gone are the days of kind of simply waiting for the tactical teams to arrive. We've replaced don't go in until it's safe with concepts like dynamic risk assessment. And yes, you have to be trained in that. All right. Gone are the days of thinking about every single person caught up in an event as a helpless victim and part of the problem that needs managed. Take my good friend there, Christina Heron. She was forced to provide care at the Boston Marathon finish line when that bomb went off. Not by choice, because she was there. All right? And she became part of the solution, and many would have died not for her interventions. And I suggest to you that wherever you work, the care gap is simply not a pre-hospital catastrophe. It could be as dynamic as, and I heard a story that completely mimicked our own story. It could be as dramatic as a failure of a hospital infrastructure. So, with all the transport resources in the world you could ever wish for, but we had nowhere to flow the patients to. And we had a big fire in our generator room in Wexford not that long ago. So the fire was in the very room where the backup and the electricity supply was. So we could not go to backup generation. This is coming to Sweden. And this I absolutely promise you if you don't manage it. It's not all 3 lanes of super highways with green lights all the way as the incident moves from the point of the incident to the hospital. And you get all these wonderful hospital incident plans that are written and go to booklets this size, and nobody ever reads them once the launch has been made. And specializing in emergency medicine, you all live that reality daily. You work in a care gap at many times, and it's not normal. Your skills in managing this gap, is why emergency medicine as a specialty is now being sought and now being developed. And I might open a can of worms and start to get some honest debate about management of overwhelming numbers of casualties. So I'm going to give a bit of a rant, and that's okay, because sometimes getting things off your chest is healthy. But I do so with kind of 32 years of practice pre-hospital and a master's degree in disaster medicine. We need to take things down to basics. So I think we all agree that our ultimate goal in any mass casualty situation is to have less dead. Yeah? And nobody wants to see headlines like these that came out of the London bridge attacks. Chaos, hindered medical response. Medics did not know where the victims were. Officials took too long, etc., etc. And you'll always get those criticisms in the press. But we don't want to see these headlines. We want to see good headlines. And the problem with creating good headlines is it's bloody complex. It isn't simple. And I want to try and simplify things because people will continue to die, and turning these sort of bad headlines about your hospital into good headlines, and the bad headlines only existing because of this care gap, which is really a failure of hospital management and not a failure of emergency medicine. But too often it's the emergency department couldn't cope, or the emergency department was unable to. And that's grossly unfair, and we've got to, as a specialty, change that narrative. So what lessons can we learn from pre-hospital emergency medicine for in-hospital emergency medicine in times of crisis? Now, our hot zone thinking needs to change. Now, hot zone, I'm going to go from hot zone, warm zone, to kind of quiet green zone. Hot zone thinking needs to change, and the definition of a hot zone there is where there is still danger to those responding. Okay? So that would be, there's an active shooter, and the active shooter is still around. Okay? But it needs to change. We need to break a number of what we call legacy shackles to move forward. So, here's the thing. We need to train. We need to train not simply to evacuate casualties out of that hot zone. And we need to train those casualties, in other words, the people, those zero responders, those people who are caught up in the incident, if they are not injured, actually how to do things simply, like stop bleeding. It's not difficult. We need to open up previously inflexible barriers, and that's the way we do things like cordons. I'll come back to that. We need to develop common tactical goals, like what is the overarching goal in a mass casualty incident that so happens to be a marauding attack. We do not define that very, very well. We need to completely scrap that traditional triage, yes, and concentrate on what we are good at in emergency medicine, which is flow. And we really need to decentralize and empower that senior decision maker to be able to be flexible and break the rules, because otherwise people will just box themselves into not actually being very effective at all. And these shackles move on. So inquests have repeatedly highlighted the vital role of bystanders, or those off-duty healthcare staff who find themselves caught up in an instance. They're the ones who will attempt to start that life-saving care wherever they've been, whatever they are doing, however they can. All right, and we have to empower and enable and encourage, rather than kind of hinder them and think they're not part of the solution. So the general public, the staff at an event who are working, say those members of staff who are working the water stations at the marathon, and that went up. People who are working in bars, for example, in Champs-Élysées, when the French terrorist attack took place. They live, they socialize, they study. It's their territory, right? And they will help when the shit hits the fan. And it's illogical to simply dismiss willing hands when all hands on deck are really available. So how citizens actually interact with the emergency services need to be trained. And that's actually not that difficult. It's just a little bit of public education. And you just teach it at schools. This is kind of developing a zero responder mindset. And if you think about it, right, so the balloon goes up, something bad is after happening. In the first 5 to 10 minutes, you have only got those persons caught up in that attack, right? Yes, you will slowly start getting police, fire, co-responders, and that will overlap. Some of them might arrive at 5 minutes, or within 5 to 10 minutes, or even at 15 minutes, depending where it is. Okay, so if you can't stop a big spurting artery and you've got a massive hemorrhage, a person can bleed out in that first 10 minutes, can't they? So to think that these people are bringing that life-saving massive hemorrhage control is illogical. It's not going to happen. Okay? So that's why public bleeding control kits, for example, are starting to become more and more of a thing in places like Paris, in the States, definitely. And the interesting thing is the EMS, or the medical professionals that are responding, generally, by the time they get access to the patients, because these guys are starting to cordon and boundary and say, hang on, let's check if it's safe first. By the time it's safe for these guys to access, considerable time is usually passed. There's absolutely no hope in hell that it's paramedics that are going to stop the bleeding. Until you get that very clear in your heads, and stop investing tons and tons and tons of money on paramedics to stop the bleeding in such incidents. They shouldn't be the ones who have all of the tourniquets and bandages and bring that to the party. Not at all. They actually need to be attached to the wall of pubs, clubs, places where there's history, places which are potential terrorist attacks. And absolutely, definitely not. We're not, by the time we hit hospital, going to make meaningful interventions on, for example, the massive hemorrhage. So, improvised tourniquets. Takes minutes to bleed out. The vast majority of improvised tourniquets, they work. But, why don't we get something that's decent and made and is part of it, something that we can teach our kids in schools to use. So, there's other maneuvers that we can do. We could teach people how to hold open an airway. That's not difficult. And actually, that is that concept in the military of the IFAC, which is your own personal field first aid kit, And that concept of that IFAC is, look, we will carry our IFACs. Like, what do you carry in your car, by the way? Right? Yeah, so you have a first aid kit, but what is it that's actually going to kill somebody now? Yeah, so they're really going to cut the mustard, right? So that's the IFAC that the military carries. So they know you get a gunshot somewhere, and they've got exactly what they need to halt the process. Let everything tension simmer down, and other people come to their aid later. All right? You have to train to manage these sort of things. You don't know how to use a junctional tourniquet or a massive hemorrhage control pack or pack a wound with Celox if you haven't been trained. And we even know that the way that we've been training our paramedics is simply not efficient enough because we don't do enough good quality simulation to enable you to actually appreciate the aggressiveness that you've got to inflict on this person to actually stop that bleeding and save their lives. Because putting up bandage upon bandage upon bandage upon bandage just does not work. You've really got to learn how to pack wounds properly. And it's a technique. Particularly when what we call the gloves of panic are on, when, oh my God, this is my shopping mall. I mean, I come here to, decompress. And this guy's bleeding. So public education is absolutely crucial. So in earthquake-prone countries, for example, more lives are saved by simple lessons such as drop, cover, hold. Yeah, that's how they manage earthquakes. In a large fire, simple containment and evacuation drills will save far, far more lives than the fastest fire service response. Do you know how to evacuate this lecture theatre if the door you came in was compromised? Do you walk into a room and actually think, how do I get out? We got told that at the start, didn't I? In a terrorist attack, run, hide, tell will ultimately save more lives than learning CPR. And it's about getting into that mindset of, what will save more, not just the individual. And we need to train the public, and this is definitely needs to be a coordinated response. And you guys need to be trained too in what's going on. I did talk about cordons, and I said I would come back to them. So this is our protocol that's well written and established, and what the EMS is meant to follow when there's a disaster. And you've seen things that look roughly the same. We need to open up these artificially created barriers because, ultimately, cordons or zones both take time and people, in other words, fire and police, to properly establish and then to police, in other words, to stop people crossing them. And you see, once they're in place, you get what happened in Manchester, in the Manchester Arena. Things go catastrophically wrong. So during the Manchester Arena bombings in 2017, response agencies were actively prevented from responding beyond the outer cordon. That's what's killed people. There's considerable issues in that report. And it was the cordons itself that killed people. The protocols and the procedures killed people. And that is very sobering. And people were unable to or unallowed to make what we call a dynamic risk assessment. Because if you empower people to make a dynamic risk assessment, many, many, many lives would have been saved. Appropriate risk has to be taken. Real physical harm has been caused to both patients and to responders, right? Over caution. That's right. Caution kills people. And we've got to get that balance right. And over caution was highlighted by the inquest into Manchester as the key contributing factor to a number of patients' deaths. In any case, how do you define what is safe and unsafe, particularly if the incident is actively evolving? So, whilst flow of people away from the hot zone or anywhere which could become hot is vital, but so too is the opening of those cordons once they've been set in place. So those cordons need to be able to be dynamic, because we used to think of an incident as, oh, there's an incident over there on the docks. Well, if the people who are causing the incident jump in a ship and move across the docks, then that has moved, hasn't it? And yet there's so much inflexibility when you establish a cordon. So that concept of that shifting hot zone was well kind of addressed in a very good paper by Claire Park, who's one of the medical advisors to London HEMS. We need to keep things moving. Patients in mass casualty incidents are effectively trapped by circumstance and artificially created barriers, when frequently, often, all that is required to survive are simple, life-saving interventions from responders a few meters away, being held back by protocol. They're very sobering words, aren't they? So a successful strategy employed, for example, in Paris was to create nests. Okay, so nests, these are, you bundle your patients up, okay, and you take them with you and you keep moving forward. Now, they haven't been evacuated yet, but you keep moving forward with the tactical teams. And as they found them, they bundled them into these nests and had tactical medics or TEMS teams, so paramedics armed to the teeth, able to defend themselves, moving with those first line as they're moving forward. All right? Because you don't know what's going on, and you rather have all your friends around you with big weapons to keep you safe and keep your patients safe. So London Bridge. Critical care interventions on scene for the most seriously injured patients have traditionally just been viewed as irresponsible. You know, why are you putting all your resource into that? So in a hot zone like that, even more irresponsible. So these guys were doing a thoracotomy here. But could bridging a procedure on a scene instead of waiting for the hot zone to become safe, could that be sensible? So this HEMS team was tied down anyway. So they said, look, we can't move forward, so we're going to do this anyway. All right? And if things become unsafe, we'll have to leave. And if we're presented with any other patients, fine, we'll start breaking off and treating them as a priority. But they actually made some very good progress. So at present, we have this therapeutic vacuum. It's called a care gap. And that gap needs to be bridged by pulling together a cohesive team of emergency service responders with that simple goal of less dead and good headlines. And what are the issues? I mean, the current strategy, for example, for a tactical guard or police officer here is to focus on that target. So the current goal for the tactical team is to leap over that dying person and keep going, right? Just focusing on the targets. They do so indiscriminately at all costs. That mindset is not going to start treatment. Okay? The current goal for fire and rescue in a major fire involves persons to snatch rescue that patient and move them along. All right? Control of the fire is the priority for the firefighters. So they don't think the patient, they think control fire. All right? The mindset is starting to change. In an icy motorway, a big road traffic collision, what do the police think about? They think about preventing further accidents, so they stop the traffic, yeah? And then there's an investigation, so that's the next thing in their minds. But that mindset of, oh, this is the police's job, that's not going to start treatment. So there is a sweet spot. There is a balance, and this excuse of medical is not my job is simply not acceptable by the public anymore. You know, too many people are dying. And there's a lot of these artificial barriers that are created by committees that simply don't, just simply make it more difficult for the majority of emergency responders, to place a hand on somebody who's bleeding. So we've got to get rid of these barriers. We know too that traditional first aid training for police, fire, and other primary responders is flawed. You can't blame these guys, okay? So what do their management prioritize? Their management prioritize policing or firefighting. And obviously, that's their job, okay? So how do you do that? How do you integrate that? So I spoke yesterday in Ireland about we bring everything, the basic first aid course, right back and enable. So when it costs money to bring in an external company to train you, right, that's going to be deprioritized. But if you are sensible and you say, right, we need our officers to be able to put on a tourniquet, and every time they go and train in the shooting range to go bang, 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 move through a building, oh, there's a casualty, kneel down, put on the tourniquet. And so if you integrate the training into their normal training, in other words, putting lead down a range, right, you are going to get somewhere. And it's about integrating training, and that requires empowerment and enablement. So in the Pre-Hospital Emergency Care Council, we're enabling those types of training to take place, right? So those guys don't have to go and spend a huge amount of money getting external agents to train them once a year or once every 2 years, and they forget their skills. So that continuous in-house training works very, very well. And it doesn't have to be higher end. It's literally the basics. Basics, wound packing, tourniquet on, move. Maybe a little bit of airway management, but move. How to put somebody onto a makeshift stretcher and keep moving. Part of the solution is tactically trained medical personnel who can work with your defense forces or working with your police, right? This is part of this whole NATO thing that's coming in for you guys, all right? Yes, it's part of the solution, but you are probably more part of the solution. You've got too much medical training, and you will overthink things in a mass casualty. 100%, you'll overthink things. So very bespoke, very simple mass casualty training is the goal. And you should probably do that alongside civilians whilst they're getting trained. So you get the basics, right? And everything is about flow. You're on scene, the scene's unsafe, there's casualties in front of you, and a lot of them. You've been asked to flow a range of casualties out the hot zone. Who goes first? So by definitions, mass casualty incidents will totally overwhelm you, your colleagues, or your health system. So there are some strategies to manage the chaos efficiently. So you've seen traditional triage, civ sorts and all those sort of things. Now this is the latest 10-second triage that's been developed in the wake of things like Manchester, London bombings, Paris, etc. It's so much simpler. You're not expected to treat anything other than if there's severe bleeding, put pressure, tourniquet, pack, move on, right? It should take 10 seconds and no more. They're walking, good luck, go. They're talking, fine. If it's got a penetrating injury, frontal, back to torso, they're priority 1. If they're not, they're priority 2. Move on. They're breathing, unable to open airway, nope, you get dead, okay? And then place in recovery position, priority 1. So much more simple than the triage civ and sort. And there's a reason to do this, and I'll come into this. You have to also keep things moving. Care cannot remain static. The urgency, the maintenance, the speed and flow, and rapid evacuation out of time-critical casualties out of the hot zone to appropriate support. It's all over all the major incident reviews you read. And talking of evacuation, the provision of cheap stretchers to simply move patients. So here's the thing. You bring all these ambulances to scene, right? Then you start to use their stretcher to go in and take the patient out, drive away. How inefficient is that? Particularly if they're injured, they're properly injured, or you need to corral people into a central location. So what we're doing now, and we're doing it through a legislative process, really. So care in mass casualty incidents is being legislative. How medical care provides is being looked at through the regulator. So we're saying, well, if you're going to host a concert, right, and you're going to have X hundreds of people, thousands of people at said concert over a certain number, you have to, as the organizer, provide stretchers. So those stretchers do not need to cost money. They don't need to be the normal ambulance stretchers. They just need to be litters. And so they've become creative, just like in the emergency. Sorry, the Irish called World War II the emergency. It's like calling the Troubles. We understate things. In World War II, what they did in London, the front railings of the houses, if you look at them, they're all stretchers, litters in some of the older London. So literally, they turned them in eventually into the railings at the front of houses. Simple stuff. So there's been innovative companies who are developing advertising banners on the side of sports, like soccer pitches, right? And there's hoardings around. Instead of just being an expensive printed on piece of sheet metal that you can do nothing with, now using those sort of things in a way, in a lattice way, in a frame way, that you can just go pick up, and now it's a stretcher. Okay, so there are innovative designs to be able to do that and move people forward. You have to think flow. In an overwhelming instant, we need to stop being concerned with making exactly the right decisions and just start making sensible decisions. And that is not the traditional kind of command and control. It's also not a democracy either. We have to empower senior decision makers. That role of the senior decision maker, which is effectively what you guys do all the time in emergency medicine, is crucial. And a balance needs to be struck. That's why we need senior decision makers. It needs to weigh up the pros and cons of the situation in front of you with the resources you've got and the types of injuries. There's no hard and fast rule here. However, to enable that empowerment of the senior decision maker, you require state and legal protection. So what state and legal protection do you have if you are caught up right now, today, driving home and it's a major emergency?
If you don't help, then you go to jail.
Okay, so that's a stick. And what carrot do you have? It's really interesting. So we looked at this in detail and how this works. And fortunately, in Ireland, we try to encourage physicians to work in the state and for the state. So the salaries in the state are much higher. Okay, number one. But number two, we have state claims agency. So we do not buy insurance. It's provided by the state, and it's very good. And that has made a tremendous leap forward into enabling people to stop and do things at accidents. We don't have that legislation where our guys can walk away if we want to. All right, so
We don't have litigation in Sweden.
we have a lot of litigation in Ireland.
That doesn't happen here.
Yeah, we have a huge amount of litigation in Ireland. Okay. So warm zone thinking needs to change too. So this is the safe, traditional safe declared zone. Okay. Every scenario is different, but those 5 hot zone principles still apply. And how we bridge those patients and keep them moving forward, and how we manage them in a chaotic environment is important. So what sort of training do you believe you require to set up an incident kind of or casualty clearing type area? So it's talked about in all of the literature. Oh, a casualty clearing area, we'll bring doctors out of the hospital and we put them in these tents and look after people. What sort of training do you have for that? Because they're in our major incident packs right across Europe. The setting up of these field hospitals. Can I promise you, if you become too focused too quickly on the patient in the front of you, you will lose the peripheries. Concentrating too much on doing all the right things, you will lose your peripheries. And it's a difficult balance to strike, but actually it's what emergency medicine has drilled into you daily, day in, day out. That keeping that vigilance, that thinking about the department as a whole, not the patient as an individual. And that's the training that people need to function in a warm zone. Or else utilize emergency medicine physicians at major incidents. It's not actually that difficult. As things become more specialized and more specialized teams are there. This is our ambulance service incident response team. So these sort of teams do exist. They're slowly getting themselves established, specifically trained and properly equipped to work with, for example, in this case, a highly infectious disease patient, underground, in this case, cave rescue, or collapsed building structures, or in the water. So these are our guys doing the human training. Didn't know there was like Captain Pirate stuff here. Anyway, but they've been flown, so they enable them to go and be flown out to cruise ships. So one of our big issues we have is cruise ships. I don't know how much of an issue you realize this is. So a big cruise ship can have thousands of people on board. Yeah, that's fine. The big cruise ships, the really big ones, have thousands of staff on board to look after like really thousands of people. Okay? And the other thing that they've got is they offer things like chronic disease cruises. Did you know that? So like dialysis cruises. So we regularly have dialysis patients who are on hemodialysis daily, coming into the port of Cork. So we went and we're going, okay, that's grand. Like you're all entitled to your holiday and everything like that. There's no worry there. How many patients do you have on your ship on hemodialysis? Oh yeah, we don't have that many. It's only 25. Okay, 25. Right. What happens if your water supply breaks out? Oh, we're in shit. Ships lose power and water supply. How do you evacuate 25 hemodialysis patients? It's not good. That team is also tactically trained. So our team trains regularly with a range of European partners, NATO partners, and Guardian, and how to actually function in these big incidents and these terrorist interesting. What's interesting is that we're able to deploy, and we've actually found most of our real horrible calls are not in cities, they're rural. They're in places where there's land disputes and rural farmers who have access to firearms, barricading themselves in where there's a lot of alcohol abuse and drug abuse. Your goal has got to be very simple. So our goal is to bridge that gap. Well, that's an hour and a half out of hospital. I got 4 casualties I'm going to, 1 in cardiac arrest, all trapped in a car. That's a difficult incident to manage. Or what about a chemical factory, for example? 70 people caught up in a gas leak, an unknown gas leak. Unknown casualties, conflicting information. It's always conflicting information. You never quite know what you got. So what do? How do you go about managing that? How do you first even approach such a scene? To get a true handle on the situation, there will always be communications issues at the start. So just accept that the majority of what you're going to get told at the start is bullshit, right? Go and find out. Take notepads. Go and work it out. Go and find out exactly how many casualties there actually are. Because most of the time, oh yeah, there's 70 casualties. No, there were 70 people working in the factory. But 35 of them were on their lunch break. Or their mid-dinner break in the middle of the night. Fine, those 35 are out the way. Okay, so now what are we dealing with? 25. Oh no, not 25, because 5 of them are on the gate. Oh, okay, so we're dealing with 20 people then. Well, actually no, because maybe 20. I don't know. Okay, so you move on, you keep moving on, and then you realize you're only dealing with two patients. So that was a 70 patient incident that came down to actually only two patients. And yeah, they were seriously unwell, but once you kind of get your head around it, we need to move. We need to keep flow. What needs to be said, it's similar to hot zone. I mean, there's patients that simply need to go. You need to just seek out those patients where hospital damage control maybe is the only relatively, it could just be the only way that they're going to survive. All right? And that's fine. You're good at that in emergency medicine. Stop trying to use all these priority cards and this and that because people's priorities change. And you get so fixated on boxing in them into these chunks that, no, you're emergency medicine physicians. Go and look at that whole sea of casualties out there and go, right, let's look, use your gestalt. Look at who the sickies are. Because you will have patients, for example, that will not realistically survive the care gap. And those patients might even need to be assigned to a palliative care pathway early. And to perform this role with dignity and actually free up resources for patients that will survive. And you're all very good at that as well. So you shouldn't be worrying about going to these mass casualty incidents. It's just doing your job and thinking. We have to dynamically move these people away from the scenes, right? For those rest of them that are hemodynamically stable, what we do, the way we approach them, right, is we very slowly but surely make sure we see everybody. Now, why have I not talked about this traditional triage, sieve, and sort, which I suspect is the same sort of. Don't take this down, right? Because it's right. It's yeah, no, okay. The reason I haven't talked about it is if you triage patients in the gold standard way that you get taught by these life support courses, right? So here we go. I'm going to get a little bit of maths with you, okay? Multiple editions of gold standard triage protocols, either over or under triage, leading to unnecessary deaths, even when done correctly. So here's the thing. It takes 45 seconds to properly sieve a patient by those guidelines. Right, you ready? So you've got 100 patients. So 45 seconds is 4,500 seconds, yeah? Or 75 minutes. An hour and 15 minutes. You haven't even touched on physiology here yet. So to do things by the book, you've got all this queue of patients, if they were nicely queued up in front of you waiting to see you, okay? All demanding on your limited resources. If you use these traditional approaches of triage, sieve, and sort every patient, I think we'll all agree if that person had a time-critical pathology, they would be dead. But what you really don't appreciate is that person number 7 in the queue who had an arterial bleed. He'd be dead too. And let's be honest, with all the real-world delays and handovers, reassessments, cutting off clothes, doing physiological things, it's cold, it's wet, it's dark, people are asking you questions. If 6, 5, and 4 had time-critical pathology, they would be dead as well. And so we know, and there's good evidence from the States, that for every minute on scene, you increase mortality by 1%. And triage is the current problem. And that's why that 10-second triage was invented, to just keep moving forward and rapidly tourniquet off, pack the wound, do simple stuff. In the Las Vegas Mandalay Bay shooting, 59 people died, 500 were injured. And they were really, 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 really close to a level 1 trauma center. They'd actually managed their hot zone well, but it all fell apart after the threat was neutralized. And our system really starts to fall apart in Ireland, and certainly in the UK it's even worse. When teams of arriving paramedics get tied up managing an arbitrary casualty clearing or collection point. And these patients are dying for what? They're dying for transport. So here it is. So the ambulance service arrives and they got the transport, right? So we've done the stretcher thing already. The ambulance service arrived, they've got the transport, and what are they meant to do? Set up the casualty clearing area. So what is not going to be transported? Patients. All right? So, inflexible thinking is highlighted by Inquest as a key contributing factor to preventable deaths. And the latest evidence suggests that we need to completely abandon current triage protocols and keep things moving. Seek out those people who will die right now or immediately and start to flow them away from the scene. This is what one of those seek out looks like. Right, guys, where are we going first? Okay, what have we got?
Okay, no calls. We're categorized here at home, Jason.
Okay, and how long has she been down?
So, the default was on her 14 minutes.
And what rhythm have we got? Stop.
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 Stop for you.
Stop. Okay, RIP. Okay. Right, what have we got here?
26 hours. Severe pain in the stomach.
All right. Yeah. What have we got here? Is unresponsive, is he?
No, he's okay. He's responding.
All right.
He's chest pain.
And in here?
Yeah, nothing major.
Right. What have we got?
We have
Post arrest.
Do you want to have a look at that?
Adequate breathing, Jason. We've got distal pulse.
Okay, what rhythm did we have originally? Assisted rhythm.
This way on the machine, yeah. 3 no shots advised, trying to read them back.
Right. And that is 10-second triage. Moving forward, moving forward, moving forward. You've got to get a handle on the scene, and it's all about Gestalt. And Gestalt is obviously a German word. It's really poorly translates into English. God knows how it translates into Swedish. But roughly speaking, it refers to making sense of the whole pattern or the configuration. And in medicine, it's about not just looking at the obvious. And I saw somebody had an AI poster up, a really good AI poster, and you realize that AI can't do this. All right? Gestalt is so much more. The ability as someone just go, things don't smell right in here. There's something not right. Okay, and there's real good evidence behind a senior clinical decision maker when you've got 31 patients on a bus in rural Kerry, 2.5 hours away from hospital. Yes, you can have a fast ambulance in the sky, but you're certainly not going to have 31. Okay, so what is your A plan? What is your B plan? We can either stress about it and go through all these protocols and procedures, or you can just do emergency medicine. Walk through everybody. This is the priorities. That's how many priority people we have. And then stop. Stop depleting all your areas of ambulances and start treating. That driver was a priority. Stick him in the heli. Fine. Go through that bus. Right? We had 65 American tourists on that bus. Right? They were all on a cruise holiday. Okay? What is the priority for these people?
Getting dialysis.
Hey?
Getting dialysis.
Yeah. So think about it. Most of them had very minor injuries. Okay? Little glass nicks and cuts. They needed TLC. Right? Where is a decent treatment facility that is going to keep moving them away? In their ship. And they are keeping on holiday, and they are going away, and they will recover well there, where there's professional doctors and, right? You do not want them overloading your system, all right? So minor injuries, give the ship a call. This is what's coming to you, lads. Good luck, all right? And we got another bus, and we put them on, and we, good luck, all right? So we obviously dispatch 2 types of assets to major incidents. So one is our app or alternative pathway car, and the critical care resource. The critical care resource manages the critically injured. The other one sensibly flows patients away. You have to empower senior decision makers. Another example, massive flood, whole communities cut off, ambulance calls, we've got to get rid of, we have to move on this patient to just like these 2 elderly people, their house is flooded, it's not livable in, and they're sick, and we've got to get them to hospital. No, they need social care. Right. Oh, we can't do that. So, right. Oh, no, those patients are coming. I'm like, no, they're not. The senior decision maker, you have to go into the floods. You have to go walk and see it for yourself. And yeah, fair enough. There was 2 elderly patients completely bedbound, and the flood waters were already halfway up their mattress. So this is a pity. Looking around, there's a big sparkly house on the hill, high and dry above the floods. Who lives there? Oh, it's the daughter's house. I have army guys, mum and dad, into the daughter's house. She wasn't having none of it. I tell you, she had all of it. She had to, right? It just happened. All right. It's very difficult to say no when you've got the army behind you. Another good example of empowering sensible, clinical decision makers is this. It's all contained in this picture from Ukraine. So a patient with a tourniquet placed in the initial chaos may actually not require them and may potentially need a relook. All right. So in the chaos of things, a lot of goodwill is going to happen, but iatrogenic damage can happen from that goodwill. And so sometimes we just need to re-look at wounds, maybe pack them, then take tourniquets off, let that reperfusion happen. And I know it's in all the guidelines. Oh, no, hang on, stop. If you've got considerable delays, don't let a young person lose their arm because of something that was a split-second decision. Another bus accident, 52 patients, 50 of them children, about half an hour away from the hospital, but it was a kilometre from the school gate. So the driver had a tree sticking into him, he really needed to go. But strategy. You've got all these kids, some of them injured, some of them not. What do you do? Exactly. All right. We relocated the incident. 44 were seen, treated and discharged in a makeshift ED in the school hall. What I found was really, really interesting, and Emma will get this, right? I actually had 2 GP referrals, letters in hand, right, for the kids to be seen in my makeshift ED. Work that out. So the parents had taken little Jimmy and Johnny, who got a minor injury, it's all happening, taken them away, gone to see their primary care doctor, who's gone, no, let them get seen by the emergency doctor in there. Yeah. Madness. Absolute madness. Mass casualty incidents come in all forms, shapes. So we had this incident at Trident Hotel, carbon monoxide poisoning. There's one lady had ongoing CPR, was critically ill, and when we turned up, and there was 100 other people in the hotel with really bad headaches. What would you do?
How did that happen?
Well, you could ask yourself, how did that happen? Is that going to actually manage the incident right now?
Get them out in the air.
Yeah. So get them outside, eh? Nobody got them outside. It was amazing. All these people, they're all being managed in the hotel, and we're going, there's something wrong in the hotel. Get out. Right? We had the paramedics, everybody, all taking blood pressures and... Lads, get outside. Oh, but it's cold. Get outside. Within 15 minutes, nobody had any headaches. Yeah. We found out what the problem was in the end. Right? You have to be sensible. We had 850 pupils in a sports hall where the kids who were leaving decided to throw a bit of a party, and they set off 3 of those marine flares. That's highly toxic yellow smoke in their sports hall. Prank gone wrong. Fine. Now, what does that trigger? It triggers a lot of respiratory irritant. So now we've got potentially 850 school kids. What do? Apart from get them outside, get them fresh air. So now you sort of start to wean it down to those who are really quite serious. So those who are really, really, really serious and look peri-arrest, get them out. And the rest of them, you're going to flood the hospital with 600 kids now? No. So what we did, we set up a in another hall, not the same one, right? We went around, and where do you think we get all these nebulizers from? So we sent out a nationwide report. This was required. We need 600 nebulizers. So every single Garda station, so every police station in the country had to go to the local nursing home and pick up nebulizer and nebulizer supplies. Where they were responsible for them, they would take them back because we estimated we only need 2 or 3 treatments. So we just nabbed these kids with Granny's nebulizer. Right? Think out the box. It can be done. All right. It wasn't we were taking the nebulizer away. The cops had them. They'll take them back. Right. And that was very effective.
Thank you very much.
And obviously we've got to record everything. But after everything happens,
I don't know how you felt. I take some
you
feedback
need to
from you.
debrief.
And if you have any suggestions on
And you need to debrief effectively, appropriately, in language that people understand. So I'm going to finish this with an amazing story from Romania, which illustrates up that care gap and opening up the different care possibilities. Until now, we looked at scenes and that would completely overwhelm an individual hospital. However, what happens is that you've got a scene that would simply overwhelm a single network of hospitals or hospitals in an entire country. So, Collective nightclub fire was a deadly fire in Bucharest, killed 64, injured 146, and is best known for the resignation of its prime minister over planning legislation corruption. Okay, and the Romanian health service team was led by a good friend of mine, Raed Arafat, and he's an anesthesiologist. He recognized very, very quickly from reports coming back from scene that the number of burns victims would totally overwhelm the Romanian healthcare system, full stop. In other words, the ICU bed requirements. It wasn't even a question of local or regional hospital capacity. It was absolutely apparent there were just not enough burn beds. Okay, so he enabled his pre-hospital critical care teams to fly seriously critically burned patients from the scene all around Europe. From the scene all around Europe. Okay, so he spread the workload to Germany, France, Netherlands, UK, and even Norway. Direct from the scene. And he opened up a lot of possibilities. Apparently, they put one of those aircrafts with 6 patients in the air, all intubated, all ventilated, escharotomies, you name it, done, from the scene, put them in the air, and they told them to fly west. They didn't even have a destination. Right?
Why did they fly over Sweden and go to Norway?
Right?
Why did they fly over Sweden and go to Norway?
Don't think Sweden took the patients.
But was there anyone in the plane with them? Because
Yeah, so this is the pre-hospital teams.
yeah, so there was enough persons to go in the plane.
Yeah, but what the point being is sometimes you have to realize really quickly, right, that this is overwhelming everything, and to move and to keep momentum going. All right, break down those traditional barriers. Now he enabled it through the EU mechanism. And he said, we've got an overwhelming incident in our country. I'm declaring a state of emergency and I need cooperation from my neighbors. So he went to health ministers and said, we are sending you right now an aircraft with 7 critically burnt patients. We need your assistance. So it was health minister to health minister. So that one actually ended up flying into the UK. And they went, okay, I don't know how we're going to do it, but yeah, we have to because it's about that mechanism. They just have to do it. All right, so very, very, very well managed incident from the start to the finish. Guys, don't ever forget that when you hit that green zone, everything's safe, your hospital, you can shackle yourselves again. All right, and it's those same things that we spoke about: training, goals, empowerment, opening up barriers, flow. You know, what legacy shackles have you got that prevent your patients from moving forward? What happens when it's just a normal day in your emergency department, all your ambulances are ramped here, right? Yeah, you train, but what happens if those protocols that you have written in good times are totally overwhelmed, or that no staff have actually even bothered to read them, right? We've reached the saturation point and gone well beyond it, particularly since, the end of the pandemic. We have patients warehoused in emergency departments, and nothing as elegant as a temporary corona hospital could ever be opened or even staffed, because we just don't have enough staff. We have to open up traditional bottlenecks like radiology. Radiology is always going to be a challenge resource. Have you systems in place, for example, to coordinate and triage requests appropriately if it was a mass casualty event? Are your radiologists trained in that same mindset? Probably not now, but if you brought them along to your major emergency trainings and influence and gave them those principles of managing flow, right? They will come on board. They'll be more than happy to sieve through things and sort them into appropriateness. Okay, or are we piling on the same systems? How does your lab cope? Lab processes are extremely efficient. Those sort of people. How do they cope with surge? They don't cope with surge very well. So start listening to your lab when they say, well, we probably need a new machine because this one is on its last legs. And above all, I think if there's nothing more, you have to have systems that empower and enable senior decision makers. Naval warfare tactics, 1800s, right? Basically it meant lining up ships in 2 rows and shooting the hell out of each other, okay, until there was a winner. It's what we currently do, right? Google the Battle of Trafalgar. Nelson lined up his ships in 2 rows, and he sailed directly at the line of the enemy ships. It just wasn't the done thing to do. And then he empowered his captains to fight however they wanted to fight when they arrived, right? And overwhelming odds, obviously, Nelson won, all right? Empower senior decision makers. Do what you do normally in triage. Seek out those patients who can't wait, who need care. Big sick, little sick, discharge to GP, refer to, do what we do every day. Above all, remember that emergency medicine is the best 15 minutes of every other specialty. I thank you.